Hi everyone, welcome to this first episode of the Psychedelic Integration Compass. I'm your host Clara, and today we're going to be talking about psychosynthesis, a transpersonal soul-based psychology that can be used for psychedelic integration. Here with me is Val Silidker. She's the co-founder and co-director of the Psychospiritual Institute and a board-certified leadership coach and trainer. She's also the person who's designed the course that I've done in psychosynthesis. I use psychosynthesis myself in the work that I do with clients, and it's super valuable for this kind of work. I'm so glad that she's here with us today. Val, how are you doing?
Hey, Clara, I'm just honored to have this conversation with you. And I absolutely love the work that you are doing in the world. It is so powerful. And I know that our world needs this right now. So I'm just so happy to be here and to dive in deeply together. And I'm excited for everyone who's joining us.
Yeah, I'm very excited as well about having you here and everything that's going to unfold through this conversation with you today. So let's start with a question for you. What led you to transpersonal coaching and psychosynthesis? And also, how is that informing the way that you're teaching now?
Let's see. In a nutshell, my background is in the work of deep ecology and ecopsychology. And for that last 25, 30 years, I've been working with people in discovering, who we are at the core of ourselves. And I started off as an environmental activist and doing a lot of, really hands-on work in the world. And I realized very quickly that what's at the root of our experience of disconnect from each other and from our planet and from just who we are in the deepest way is that we have forgotten ourselves. We've gotten kind of lost in a lot of conditioning in our world where we think that humans are separated from the natural world. And it's created a big chasm, I think, between us as humans as well. And so I realized along my path, this is the short version, that my work is fundamentally about helping us rediscover who we are, remembering ourselves in the deepest context. And so I started doing a lot of deep ecology and embodied deep ecology work, facilitating groups, working one-on-one with people. And I felt like in a lot of ways, I was winging it as a coach, using the tools that I had understood so far. And I realized I wanted more support, more structure around how to access our deeper sense of self. And I found through two of my mentors in the ecological world, this work of psychosynthesis. One of them had written the first book in the West, Molly Young Brown, on psychosynthesis, who was also my peer in the work of deep ecology. And another mentor of mine, and I'm like, what is this work of psychosynthesis and what is this all about? So I found my way to a program where I studied this work of psychosynthesis and transpersonal psychology. And I can say more about what that is in a moment. And about 3 years later, I just fell in love with this work. It gave me a foundation, a structure. It allowed me to bring all the work I had already been doing inside of this fundamental understanding of the human psyche and how to work with ourselves on many different levels. So that's how I found my way to psychosynthesis. And it really allowed me to not only transform my own life in a deeper way and have incredible tools to connect to myself more deeply. But I realized working with my clients, I was able to reach a whole new level of depth and understanding on both the personal and the ecological level. So it supported me in so many ways. So my partner, Alyssa, and I created Psychospiritual Institute about 8 years ago so we could bring this work to other leaders, emerging leaders in the world, because it's been so powerfully transformative. So that's how I found my way to this transpersonal psychology as a framework for the work that I was already doing. And where I am now in the work of psychosynthesis is in that confluence of how to merge our deeper ecological understanding and what's happening collectively in our world right now with a deeper transpersonal psychology that helps us connect to who we are within this context and how we activate ourselves to participate in larger ways.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that share, Val. And yes, I'd like to bring the attention to that word transpersonal now, because in transpersonal psychology, this notion of the transpersonal, because some listeners might not be familiar with it. So the idea of transpersonal psychology is the study of psychology that's concerning the self and beyond the self. So what's concerning the person and what goes beyond the person in terms of something deeper inside. So the connection to higher qualities of the higher self, if you want to call it that, or your connection to your soul and the connection to source, really, because that's what, the soul connects you to ultimately, is connection to source as well. So all these different elements are taken into consideration when working with psychosynthesis, and also especially when working, for example, with purpose and what's driving us. So we do this work with psychosynthesis and working with different elements of it, so that when looking at, for example, getting clarity about where we want to head towards, and the direction that we want to take in life, if we're making changes especially, then we can look at it in terms of, yes, your personal purpose and personal direction, but also collective purpose. So something that has a benefit not just for your own life, but for everyone that's around you, basically. So there's this idea of doing psychological work through your soul connection and through mystical experiences as well. And that's how now I'm going to connect this framework of psychosynthesis with the work with plant medicine, psychedelic medicine, and mystical experiences. So psychosynthesis is a beautiful framework for working with mystical experiences and peak experiences, because in a nutshell, really, like the plant medicine journey, it is a journey towards the transpersonal, towards something deeper inside of you, towards your source connection, your divine, whatever you want to call it, divine connection, to get information, to get clarity, to shift your perspective about yourself, potentially your past. I mean, often we go into plant medicine because we want to make changes, because we might not be, happy with some aspects of our lives. People go into it for very different reasons. You might go in to get, as I said, more clarity, to even tap into our creative potential, our creativity, through some kind of soul connection and spiritual connection. And that's what the transpersonal really kind of helps with, this concept of connecting to something much deeper inside of you that connects you to everything else that is in existence. So, and then there is also this notion in psychosynthesis, again, that does connect back to the work with plant medicine, which is this idea of soul infusion. So you're working with, again, like purpose and blocks at the same time. And I really like that balance that we get when working with psychosynthesis, and especially in relation to psychedelic work. And someone comes back to me, if they had a challenging experience, or a lot came up during their journey, a lot of potential challenging aspects of their lives or themselves, you can work with that. And at the same time, you can also work with what's bigger there that wants to emerge from your soul. And that's what is called soul infusion. It's this idea that you are working in psychosynthesis, but I think it's really similar anyway with psychedelic work, with what wants to emerge from the soul, from your soul, and what might stand in the way of that, which is potential blocks from past experiences, conditioning, beliefs, mindsets that you've adopted, often earlier on in life for various reasons, for protecting yourself or as a coping mechanism. So you're working with both at the same time. And I really love that, because going back to the connection to the transpersonal, you're working with your personal blocks, what's kind of like, if you want to call them blocks or personal limitation that you have at the moment, to then connect to your soul's wisdom, to something much deeper, something that is beyond you, is beyond the personal. And it is the transpersonal, so you can also connect to why you're here and what you came here for. And as you're saying, you were saying earlier on, connecting to who you really are.
I'll just add one little piece to that, which is I look at it in kind of two dimensions. So the transpersonal is beyond the personality. So we, in traditional coaching, we work with the personality, what's coming up, those limiting ideas and blocks, and then working through those and then, accomplishing a goal. With transpersonal psychology, we lean into who I am. What is the blueprint written inside of me? We each have a unique fingerprint. And part of our work is discovering what that is that's uniquely mine within the context of the whole. And so the transpersonal allows us to really touch into the deeper dimension of what am I? Who am I? What do I deeply desire? And that's a whole nother level of exploration. And that's the one dimension of that, which is the personality and the soul. The other is the transpersonal between who I am as an individual and how I connect to the whole of the world. So it's kind of almost a horizontal sense of that interpersonal that you mentioned. So I just wanted to say a little more about that because I think it relates to psychedelics in the way that, plant medicine is one way for us to touch into the energy of who we are at that soul level, to glimpse what's already written inside of us, that sometimes when we can't get out of our own way, it's hard to access. So when we take plant medicine, not only do we, it allows us to connect more deeply to who we are, but it also opens us up to the deeper wisdom of the world. And we realize that we're interconnected. That's why we have such a feeling of oneness and wholeness. Psychosynthesis is a psychology of wholeness, not just as an individual, but who I am, connected to earth consciousness or the great mystery that gave birth to the universe. What are we at the core? And, when we have an experience with plant medicine, we're tapping into the wisdom of, plant medicine, plant wisdom, and also how that's rooted and connected to the greater wisdom of life that we don't often hear because we're just so layered with movement and busyness and conditioning and ideas and blocks to, who we know we are. So psychosynthesis is so relatable because in psychosynthesis, we are tapping into the soul of who we are. In plant medicine, we're tapping into the soul of who we are. What I'd like to discuss a little bit around this is the importance of integration and where psychosynthesis actually plays a role in, like, as a companion to the psychedelic experience. So if we only do psychedelics, we have an experience of what I sometimes refer to as premature bliss, where it's like, I'm all of a sudden tapping into the soul of me and I'm connected to everything and I feel one with it all. And then as I, come back into my kind of mundane experience, my everyday world, at first I feel, oh my God, electrified and activated and connected. And then slowly over a few days or a week or two, I kind of like fall back into my old patterns. So then I look for another psychedelic experience because that felt so good. So there's a danger of bypassing. And what I mean by that is using psychedelics constantly, like every weekend, every day sometimes, in order to try to feel that and connect to that and feel that and connect to that. And what happens as a result is that we don't actually, we keep reaching for that premature bliss, which the more I take, the more it slips. And it becomes almost an addiction or a way of escaping rather than a way of accessing my subconscious, accessing the soul of me, and then integrating and deepening into that work in my day-to-day life so I can begin to create change and embody more of that understanding within me. Psychosynthesis is a great tool to support this.
I totally agree, because actually I was listening to this pattern that you were describing, and what that does in a way that bypasses and is very unconscious, it reinforces that pattern of relying on the external for happiness, for fulfillment, for something. And it also reinforces that feeling of internal lack, that something is missing and you can only get it from outside. Whereas what psychosynthesis does, which is beautiful, it supports the integration process in such a beautiful way that you basically start anchoring your inner wisdom and start really peeling off the layers to listen to the voice of your soul more and more, and also bring home all these other parts that might tend to, get in the way because you haven't made friends with them, you haven't got to know them, all these parts of yourself that, they need attention and they can be integrated. So that's also what I love about psychosynthesis. Another thing that you were mentioning is it's a very balanced way to work with the psyche and to work with what comes up even in plant medicine journeys, because it focuses on both the shadow and the light. So we'll be working with the parts. We do parts work. In psychosynthesis, we call them subpersonalities. You will be working with what might be blocking you, and you will make friends with it, and you will understand it from the point of view of, we call it the loving observer, the soul. So you learn how to connect to that center of awareness and bring home all these other parts. But you also really connect to your calling, your deeper calling, and that's the light element. And I really like this balance in this work. It doesn't just focus on what you might perceive as, I want to shift that and that, but you also really focuses on your deeper desires, like you were saying, or what's calling you. That can really give you strength in your integration process and in your personal evolution. So that's why it's such a beautiful support for this work, and it can help you really bringing it forward in a way that you start doing a lot less plant medicine, basically. And then what I found personally when I do it, because I'm doing all this other beautiful soul work around it, is so much more intense and potent, and I get so much more out of it, even when I'm in, because I have nurtured that connection, that soul connection within me that's at play all the time. And that can work with the spirits of the plants, and it can work with my spirits guides, guides if someone is into shamanism. But ultimately, the real center, the centering force is within me. So it really helps you to do that and mask different aspects that you might not understand about yourself, and really tap into your soul's wisdom. So now this idea of holding both, this idea of synthesis in psychosynthesis, where we're holding this and that. And I think that's a really useful skill to learn, especially when you go into plant medicine journeys, because a lot of challenging things can be opened up. And I like to hear a little bit more about what you think, can be supportive in how this idea of synthesis might relate to plant medicine journeys as well, and integration with them.
Yeah, that's great. And you brought up a couple ideas that I feel would be important to touch on in what you just shared. And one of them is parts work, which might be completely unfamiliar to some people listening. So I think it's important to maybe start there. And so, when we have an experience that shows us, if I can, I'm remembering when we spoke the other day, there was an experience that you had recently had where you discovered ways that you had been showing up that you're like, oh, this is how I've been showing up. It's a pattern in me, and I prefer to show up a different way. And I'm seeing that right now. And you had this awareness come through during a journey, right? And so I'm going to pick up on that just for a second, because I'm sure it's very relatable. When we go into a plant medicine journey, we discover a lot about ourselves. It's not just the soul. Oh, here's my soul and 111, right? Sometimes we start to see our shadows come through, and it shows us things that we're not always conscious of. So part of the work of psychosynthesis is working with the unconscious to make it more conscious, and not just to be aware. Okay, great, got it. No, what is actually happening for me there? So as soon as we can make something conscious, we become aware of sometimes these identities that we hold that, as Clara shared, are called subpersonalities. A subpersonality is a fragmented or wounded part of ourselves that oftentimes forms at a young age, where we've had an experience that in some way has caused us to create a survival strategy to feel safe or in control. So for example, if when I'm young and I speak up, I get in trouble all the time, I get put down all the time, I learn to get quiet, because when I'm quiet, I don't get in trouble, I don't get put down, I feel safe. So my strategy is to not speak up. And when I speak up, it doesn't feel safe for me. So I've developed a belief about myself that my voice is not doesn't matter. It's not okay for me to speak up. People don't want to hear what I have to say. I'm not good enough if I get put down. So I get quiet. So now as an adult, there might be something inside of me that needs to be said, or a boundary I need to have, or something, that I want to be a speaker, whatever. I feel a drive, I feel a burning desire for something. And yet there's a part of me that I'm identified with that stops me. Every time I will sabotage myself, I will make excuses, I will procrastinate, I will not step into an opportunity that allows me to use my voice, or I will allow things to continue happening way too long because I don't know how to speak up, because I don't feel safe to speak up. And so when I can become aware that I have that identity, what happens immediately is that I recognize that I am more than this part of me. Part of me believes that it's not okay to speak up. As I disidentify from that and I come back to myself, that deeper self that we touch into in psychedelics, that we know as the personal loving observer that can observe the inner parts of me. When I come back to that place, I can now work with this part of me because I am more than that part. And I can see that there's a survival strategy there that actually keeps me and limits me from accessing my potential. And I can understand the needs, and I can hold this part of me like a parent to a child with love and compassion, and begin a process of integrating this part where I no longer need that survival strategy to feel safe. I might feel the fear of speaking up. I might feel nervous about it. And yet I'm connected to a deeper truth, which says my voice matters. So I can now make new choices. I activate my sense of self and my will to be who I am, to make choices that honor who I am and align myself more deeply. That's this powerful work. So the importance of psychosynthesis here, working with subpersonalities and integration, is that when we can identify these things during a journey, now after that journey is finished, I want to be able to work with the processes that help me to create a new pattern of behavior and way of being that aligns with who I am, and not a couple of days later or a week or two later slip back into these patterns where I'm needing that external, as you were speaking of earlier, an external thing in order to try to access it for a few more days and access it for a few more days. The integration is where I actually create deep and lasting change.
Let's talk about now how to also use psychosynthesis to put things into action, like you were saying. So once that something from the unconscious is made conscious, then we also have a choice. And we have a choice of disidentifying from all beliefs that might be attached to these personalities and these patterns that we've created, usually in childhood, to protect ourselves. That's usually how they are created. And we got a choice. So, and there's a moment that in psychosynthesis is called the choice point, where it's possible, once you become aware of something in a different way, to create a little bit of distance so that you have the space to do something differently and to really align your actions with your values, or the new values that you have discovered, the new you that you're discovering through this process of integration and psychosynthesis and plant medicine. So psychosynthesis is a beautiful system for creating change long term. And that's why it's so valuable for integration, because you keep on doing this work after the retreat, after the plant medicine journey, and you really reinforce it. So there is this moment of choice where, after having created a different type of awareness from your soul's wisdom, you can see something in a slightly different way. And you can choose to do something maybe slightly differently from now, and then in time, very differently from how you used to. And what helps there, I remember the concept of the secret pause as well, which I really loved when we did the course, where creating that distance, even creating those moments, even using your breath, you can use somatics even to just breathe into the space and wait, can be magical, even if it's just a few seconds, because it's a moment of change, even just creating that pause that maybe you were not able to do before, to kind of pause before in that moment. And then you have the choice. And that what supports then taking a different choice is also using our will. And that's connected very much to, again, in psychosynthesis, there are Roberto Assagioli, who's the founder of Psychosynthesis, identifies three kinds of will. The strong will, which is when you're putting kind of a lot of effort into making something happen, to putting something into action. The skillful will, where you're using your skills and you use the will in less forceful, no, I wouldn't say forceful way, but in a less kind of like a heavy work way. And then the good will, which is connected to your morals and your ideals and your values. And so I really love to hear from you, Val, as well, like how can we use the will for creating change? And we'll be touching on this concept as well of the ideal model. And I know a lot of people probably don't know about it because they're not familiar with psychosynthesis. So that's also like the ideal model. They're all connected, the choice point, the will, and the ideal model. The ideal model is how ideally you would like to create the change that you're looking for. And it's very much connected again to the transpersonal qualities that you might be tapping into and how you envision yourself and your life moving forward. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, again, like some really juicy concepts there. The first thing I want to say is, I think I really want to stress the importance of this integration work, because this is really where the work is. This is where we actually create change. If we just do plant medicine ceremonies, it's just kind of like one after the other after the other. The work is as we integrate. It's before, when we set our intention and a vision for what we're stepping into in our ceremony, and it's during, being held in a really powerful way that honors the intentions that have been set. So you're already being held before you even begin. And then it's accessing what came through and exploring that. And there's so many ways we can do that. Psychosynthesis offers so many amazing tools. Like we just talked about subpersonality work and working with parts. That's only one part of this incredible, very rich and dynamic framework. So another piece of this, and I'll touch on the ideal model as well, but another piece that's just coming through is, imagining that we're having an experience, a psychedelic experience, and there's a lot of visions that we tend to access. And this is so powerful. It's really an activation of our imagination in service to what's written in our subconscious that's coming through. And it comes through sometimes in metaphor or through replaying instances in our lives in many different ways. And so one of the ways we can work with that is looking at guided imagery and exploring symbolism, and really powerfully looking at what are some of the images that came through, and how does that allow us to access more of our subconscious, to understand where we're at, where we're moving, what we deeply desire, and what we actually want in our lives. So I wanted to just say that, because that's a powerful way of working, and part of what you would be doing in integration work is looking at what information came through, both in symbol, metaphor, and in literal ways. And then the ideal model. The ideal model is not just an idealistic way, but it's a realistic way. So it's pulling who I am, and forward, and activating the imagination in service to who I am and how I imagine myself emerging as the next step in my life. And it can be in general, like, how do I want to see my life? And it could be very specific. Maybe I'm focused on my relationship, and what is an ideal way for me to navigate myself in this relationship right now, or to recover from an argument with my spouse. What is an ideal way for us to come back together in our hearts? I find myself in these patterns. What would I like to see happen different? So the ideal model is first kind of creating that vision of what feels most ideal, because a lot of times we operate from what we call false models, which are maybe ways that we're meeting other people's expectations, or ways that we might over evaluate ourselves or undervalue ourselves, or secret daydream models for how I think I'm supposed to be in the world that I can never access, because it's this idea of perfection that's not realistic. And so when we can understand those, then that's why the ideal model is a realistic way that I can begin to step into that next vision of myself. So it's powerful to begin to create that for ourselves, because the brain doesn't know the difference between reality and imagination. So when we begin to create an ideal model, we're activating our brain in a certain way that begins to pull our will forward. So this is how I see myself. It's the way of being that I want to embody. It's my way and the choices that I make. I want to see myself step into that would feel more like me. Like, this is who I am. I don't know what I just did, but that wasn't me. But this would be me. So the choice point is where I recognize how I tend to fall into patterns based on maybe a subpersonality that might be driving the bus in that moment, or a false model that I'm trying to live into that's not fully me. And instead of going into a pattern, it's noticing what triggers that pattern. And in those moments, what would be more ideal? How would I more ideally like to respond in those moments versus reacting? So when I can identify that, now I can start to look at, okay, this is a more ideal pattern for me. And I want to create this new pattern of behavior in my life that feels like me. So now I start to activate that. So now all of a sudden I'm in my day-to-day life and something comes up and I find myself falling into a default pattern. But I've done so much work around awareness with this that I get to activate my will now and go, wait, my choice point, this is a choice point for me. And I actually would choose this. So my first choice might be default, but as soon as I can catch that, I can make a second choice. And for me, it's all about that choice, the second choice, until that second choice becomes our way of being. So it's okay to default for a second, catch it, create a new pattern. And that's what integration helps us do. It helps us to map out our new patterns, our new choice points, to create a more ideal way of how I want to be, and the patterns that really honor who I am. So I can create new ways of being. So day to day, I get to practice this in my ordinary world, right? So that's the power of embodying these changes and now becoming who I am more fully.
Yeah, beautifully said. I love that explanation of all this. I mean, I did throw in a lot of concepts there that are quite rich, and well done for, bringing them all together in such a short amount of time, explaining them. And yes, and I like to kind of tap back into symbolism and guided imagery and using the imagination, and exactly what you were talking about at the very beginning, which can be very useful for then really substantiating your ideal model, your ideal ways of being in the world, and making them more consistent. And you can train yourself. And what came to me while you were talking about all that is mirror neurons. As you were saying, we don't know, the brain doesn't know the difference, okay, between something that you're imagining and something that's actually happening. If you are imagining and seeing it, it will respond. And then the whole of you will have a response to whatever it is that you're imagining and envisioning. And that can be such a power. And that's why also in psychedelic journeys, what you see can really affect you. And then again, going back to integration can really help you unpacking what you've seen. And I quite like to make a point on this, by the way, because a lot of people, they take plant medicine, they get really into the imagery and the visuals, but I like to look at the full spectrum of it. The emotional content and your emotional response to what you see is just as important, and sometimes even more. And it's interesting how you can use the both in tandem, right? You can use visuals to trigger emotional responses and different responses in the body, in the whole of you, the whole kind of energy field that you embody, and then vice versa. Emotions can actually bring imagery. So I just want to make a point there as well, because a lot of people, I've done some integration with some people that they got so lost in the story, what they saw, and then I'm like, but there's one dimension of it. And let's use imagery in a way that is much more well-rounded, and it involves all the other elements of you as well. And let's also tap into the emotion that imagery is evoking, because that's how then you create something new as well, especially when thinking about envisioning something for the future and really tapping into the essence of who you really are. It's much more rounded than just envisioning. However, the visions can really help. And they can really help, as you were saying as well, with the repatterning. And then that's what integration is as well. It's about creating new patterns, creating new ways of being, And there's such a beautiful, again, parallels between the plant medicine journeys with the visions that you get there, that sometimes they're like, oh my God, what am I seeing? And they come out from your subconscious, deep subconscious sometimes, and what you can do afterwards in a more conscious way through integration and with the same skills that, I use in plant medicine journeys, but in a different way, let's say that. So,
we all move so fast in life. We're going, we're producing, we're producers. We got to get things done. We got to be busy, right? Our world trains us that way. And so sometimes we have an experience where we spend like a minute on it, and I don't mean that necessarily literally. It could be a few minutes, but the idea is that, okay, I just had this incredible experience and look at what came through for me, and wow, and maybe even journal for a day or two about like what you saw. And then you move on, and then you go to work, and then you're with your friends, and then boom, 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 boom. Imagine what it would be like instead of spending quote unquote 1 minute, or like a day or whatever it is, just quickly reflecting on the experience, to dive very deep into the exploration of what came through for you, and do it over a period of time where you're working with that deeply and getting to know yourself on whole new levels through this access point of psychedelics, right? So you could spend 1 minute and then move on, and then go for the next psychedelic experience and spend 1 minute and move on. Or you could have a psychedelic experience and deepen really over a period of weeks or even months of exploring what comes through in the many, many layers that are revealed to us, just starting with an access point. It's incredibly powerful. And I just want to stress that, because that's what this work is about. It's about that deep dive versus a quick, oh my God, I saw this. It was amazing. What happened to you? Okay, moving on, right? What is it to actually slow down in a very sacred and deep way, and held by a trained facilitator like Clara, or, others who do this integration work, to take you very deep? Imagine the kind of change that can come from that.
what comes up to me when I'm listening to that as well is this idea of getting from one insight that you get from a plant medicine journey, getting another 10 insights or 20 insights as you carry on with that work. And as you said, it's sacred work. I see integration as a sacred practice, and I see psychosynthesis as a sacred practice as well. And also, if we want to look at it more shamanically, the plants want to keep giving us gifts. They want to keep talking to us way after the retreat. There's a reason why they become this beautiful tool of connection with the soul. And I think there's a deeper ecological reason there as well. The planet is really calling us, because we need to take action and start finding new ways of being on this planet. If we want to stay on this planet, I don't want to sound too apocalyptic, but because the planet will regenerate, but it can easily not have us on it. But there is this kind of, the plants really want to communicate, and they want to communicate with our souls through us. And you can keep on doing that afterwards for this integration work. And you can really, as Val was saying, go so much deeper with it, and keep getting insights and cultivating them and more. And as I was saying earlier on, the beautiful thing is that if you're doing this work outside of it, then when you go back into a plant medicine journey, you decide to maybe have a break for a bit and then go back into it, is so much more intense and so much more kind of revealing, and it's just, you do so much deeper work with it through the integration process. So thank you, Val, for adding that, because that's really important.
It's so beautiful, Clara. And I actually really also love what you just said about, and then when you feel called and it feels time once again to dip into another psychedelic plant medicine experience, you are going in there with this wealth, this well of yourself, and this wealth of information and wisdom, and also the understanding of how to navigate this in a deeper way. So imagine now going into the next ceremony, whenever that time comes, not too soon, and coming in with a even deeper intention of how to access and even use what you've already acquired to make that experience even richer, right? We're not just like only surrendering to like how it takes us, but we're also bringing our whole selves into that surrender. It's a whole nother level of experience, even more powerful than just randomly going in and having a ceremony.
To me, that again, I see parallels between plant medicine journeys and life experiences. Is like it's literally about honoring the plant medicine experience, but because plant medicine journeys are kind of microcosms of how we live our lives outside, we can learn through honoring the plant medicine journey in a different way, in a deeper way. We learn how to honor life and life experiences in a deeper way. So there's a teaching there all the time, and and by learning that, you can, again, it's about integration. You can bring it back home and use that way of being that you've learned through the plant medicine journey into your life. And so start honoring, start taking, as you were saying, slowing down, recognizing a choice point when you're faced with a choice of behaving differently, being more able to take that sacred pause. So many things that you can bring into your experience in a different way by integrating. So yes. And so I actually touched a little bit on the ecological side of doing plant medicine work, because I do believe that the work with psychedelic plants can really help shifting consciousness on the planet. And I know you're passionate about this subject, so it's just come up, and I love to potentially talk about how actually integrating plant medicine journeys can really help the way that we treat the planet and the ecological side of things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Of course, I love that you brought that into it, because we can't separate that. When and I mentioned this earlier in our conversation, as we begin to tune in to, the question, who am I? It's never just about only ourselves, because who am I is intimately, you know, connected to the soul of the world. So I am both one with everything and a unique, differentiated self. I am both and, never either or. And our world operates as if I am a separate, completely only separate, this hyper individualism. And it is literally destroying our planet and destroying us in the process. And I think about looking at our world right now and how it's intensifying, and this idea of duality and the separation, and politically, and like in so many charged ways, we're feeling more and more separate. Social media and like the addiction of screens and like all the things that are literally pulling us away from ourselves, each other, the planet. It's like in some ways it's getting farther and farther away. And then at the same time, the equal and opposite energy is happening, where so many of us are awakening to our deep connection with life and finding ways to have more authentic relation and finding access points to remember who we are in these deeper ways. And psychosynthesis is one of those very powerful ways that reconnects us. Psychedelics is another very powerful way that reconnects us. And marrying those together is, we're taking an experience where we feel that energy of oneness, where it's almost like we just surrender. We feel ourselves expanded into everything, and everything filling our cells, our DNA, the energy in between our molecular structure on a quantum level. Like, we are part of everything. And we are born into this unique body where we are aching to express ourselves. We're all longing to participate and be fully self-expressed. And it's that energy of touching into the ecological self and the feeling of connection to this beautiful planet that is our home, that we are part of. And in healing our planet and in making new choices that honor our planet, we are healing ourselves. We are creating a kinder environment, on every level, from the toxins in our world. Like, how can we be more kind and create, more permaculture and more natural ways of, using products and things so we don't create a toxic world? And how can we be more kind to each other and to other animals and to old growth forests? And when we can bring our kindness forward and our values forward, because we feel the earth as part of our extended body, that's the foundation of transformation. Transformation cannot only be about ourselves. That that just mirrors our dominant paradigm of separation. Transformation has to ask, how is my love for more than just me? And it also includes me, including and transcending. That's how we grow in wholeness. We include and transcend. How is my will more than just for me? Clara talked about the goodwill. The goodwill is not just how good is it for me? It's how do my choices affect other people around me, the ecosystem of our planet? How do all things become considered in the way that I live my life? And so fundamentally, when we reconnect to our sense of wholeness and oneness with the world, it changes how we show up and how we behave in the choices we make. And that is the ultimate connection point and the ultimate healing.
I love this point that you made. I mean, you made a lot of points, not just one, but this very last one that you mentioned, because as you said, we don't do this work just for ourselves. We do it for everyone. As we heal the world, we heal ourselves, and vice versa. As we heal ourselves, we have better connection with everything, ourselves and the world around us. And it's such an important point to make, because any choice, all the concepts that we mentioned even today, as you were saying, using the will, the choice point, that moment in the choice point, that secret pause that you can take and to behave differently, you're not just doing it for yourself. You're doing it for so much more than just you. And that's why the motivation for the integration work and the deeper work is so much bigger than it might start usually. I mean, at least it started for me, for example, from personal struggles, and then becomes so much bigger. So, it's the work with plant medicine that has inspired me to train to do integration and psychosynthesis, and it's completely changed my life. The way it started, though, it wasn't a very conscious way. Well, it was where I was at the time, and I honor it. That's where I was. It was my entry point into, getting to know who I really am, in a sense, and it changed everything. But I started from wanting to shift certain things in my life, and then became such a bigger choice than what I would ever have expected. So that's just an example within my life that I can think of about how really this work is so much deeper than just you. There is you, and there is everything else that you're doing it for. So I love this point that you made. It's so important. That's why integration is so important, not just for you, but for everybody and the planet.
Absolutely. And living in the times that we're living in, where things are intensifying, and I think in a lot of ways we're feeling really amped up, like energetics and the feelings of loneliness, and like there's a lot coming up for us. Even things that we may have worked on are resurfacing in a way that it can feel like a slippery eel sometimes. Many of us feel more edgy, more sad. So there's so much that's amping up right now because of the state of our world, and because the world that feels outside of us informs us. It's actually also part of our inner story. We are affected by the world, and we can also affect the world. And that is why we need this kind of integration work. It is absolutely essential. It is essential to our well-being, to the health of ourselves and our planet, and to really stepping into ourselves as leaders, ways of helping to guide our world forward. We all have that leadership spark inside of us in small and large ways, and I think that doing this work activates something about, how am I showing up in ways that can make a difference? And so I feel like this work is so incredibly essential right now. We need each other. We need community. We need support. We need a coach. We need somebody on our team as an ally, especially when we're doing this kind of deep work. So I just find it to be more important than ever in these times.
I couldn't agree more with everything that you said. So talking about this work and psychosynthesis and your transpersonal work, I'm going to bring the conversation back to you now. I'd love to hear, in which direction do you see that going and evolving in the future for you and for the way you're bringing it to the world?
Psychospiritual Institute has been evolving so profoundly over the last basically decade. And, where I started with the ecological and found myself in a personal work and have really found, that confluence. And that's the work that we're doing at Psychospiritual Institute, where, we run these psychosynthesis life coach and leadership training programs. They're certification programs to become a psychosynthesis life coach. And it is so much more than coaching. It is a deep journey into ourselves where our students, as you know, Clara, dive very deep into their own personal integration work and spiritual maturity work. And it's profound. They're learning the theory, practices, techniques and tools of psychosynthesis and coaching and advanced coaching skills, and how to guide ourselves as inner leaders, right? Self-guided, and how do we hold space powerfully to create transformation and depth for others, a depth of experience for others. And we bring in and weave in the ecological into that work as well. And so, that's been the growing edge of finding this eco-psychosynthesis space, which, is how do we become more and more whole within ourselves and within our world. So that's the work that we're currently doing, and building our businesses as an extension of who we are in a way that really honors ourselves and our clients deeply and sees the soul in all of us, no matter what our stories are, no matter how we might be struggling day to day or caught up in those identifications. How do we hold ourselves and others as the deep soul that they are, as part of this living planet? And so that's the edge of this work. It's the work I'm doing. I work personally with leaders, change makers, activists, people that are making a difference in small and large ways, that really want to amp that work up. And I know that's also the work that you're doing, Clara, through psychedelics specifically, as a way in to access the subconscious. So, that's the work that we're doing. And that's what psychosynthesis is all about. And that's the work we're doing at Psychospiritual Institute as well. So our next training program is coming up in March 2025. We have a beautiful cohort already forming, ready to dive deep, into this work as change makers and in community with other people who are committed to ourselves and our world.
That's great. Thank you. So tell us, what is the best way to get in touch with you and find out more about what you do at Psychospiritual Institute?
So our website is psychospiritualinstitute.com. That's the best way to reach us. We can read all about the work that we're doing. If you look on Google, you'll see we have almost 50 five-star testimonials that are literally authentic, heart-centered, reflections of our beautiful students' experiences in this work. So I encourage people to read those because they're really from the heart of our students. And look through our website at psychospiritualinstitute.com. There's videos there. There's deep work about what psychosynthesis is. You can learn all about the history of psychosynthesis. We have some videos also on YouTube. Those are several different ways that you can learn about the work we're doing, the responses from the work we're doing, and they can always reach us through the website as well.
Thank you so much, Val. Thank you again. And thank you to our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's episode about psychosynthesis and how to use it for psychedelic integration. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next episode. Thank you for now. Bye. Thanks for joining us today on the Psychedelic Integration Compass. You can find the link to the podcast website in the details below. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like the video and subscribe to the newsletter to stay updated on what's coming next. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.